Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Studio 78 podcast. I am your host, Nache from NacheSnow.com. Okay, so who do we have today? Well, let me tell you, we have Shakira Hunt, who is an interior designer and photographer. She has been going strong now for a year and a half full time with her business after being let go of her corporate job. And you'll hear more about that story as you listen to this episode. But what I really love about this episode is there are a lot of good, actionable steps that I'll recap at the end on how she got started to make sure that she could actually be successful with her business. And one of the things that I really appreciated her talking about is being very intentional with her money and how she was going to bring money in so she can maintain the lifestyle that she was living while she was working in corporate America. So I really think you guys will get a lot of nuggets out of this. Great story of just how she got started, but also just great information on how you can continue to work towards being successful in your own side hustle or full-time business. Okay, so just a few housekeeping things. The episode show notes, because she does mention a few things that you might want to check out, is at NacheSnow.com/114. Also, while you're over at NacheSnow.com, if you like this episode, at the bottom right, you could buy me a cup of coffee, or you can click on the shop link, which will take you to my shop where you can purchase a shirt or my Life Cleanse journal, which is now digital, or one of my digital planners. So lots of ways to support the podcast. And of course, if you're on Skillshare, be sure to check out my course. So tons and tons of ways to support the podcast and get help with your productivity. And last but not least, if you love this episode, please rate me 5 stars on Apple Podcast if you're an Apple person. If you're listening to this on YouTube, please give me a thumbs up. Wherever you're listening, I'd appreciate if you hit subscribe. And if you love this episode, also please share with your friends. Okay, let's just jump right in. Let's do this. Hello, Shakira. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, so folks listening out there, I just did an intro for her, but I literally right before I hit the record button, I was just telling her how obsessed I am with all of her photography. And if you go to her website right now, which will be in the show notes, ShakiraHunt.com, you will see photos of this beautiful home and you just want to move into it. It's so inviting. So I love like your whole brand, everything. But before we get into that, would you just tell the audience a little bit about you?
Yeah, sure. So, as Nache stated, my name is Shakira Hunt, and I am a creative photographer and interior designer in Wilmington, Delaware. And that is what I do. I focus on branding and lifestyle photography, but I also still practice interior design on the side. And so I've infused both of those practices into my business full time.
Now,
Yeah.
question, did you go to school for photography or are you self-taught?
So I am self-taught for photography. I went to school full-time for design, interior design.
Ah, okay.
So
And then what made
sorry, go
you pick
ahead.
up photography?
Okay, so as a designer, going through undergrad and going through the experience of design school and studio and just understanding that, okay, I know this is a profession that I really love and feel aligned to and want to practice. I kind of got into the working field, working with a couple of architecture firms and a few design firms, and really just didn't feel like creatively fulfilled enough. And so I got to that point of understanding there's got to be more here, and I'm not sure what that looks like. And as I mentioned to you initially, listening to podcasts was around that time of graduating and working my first full-time job out of school. I started listening to podcasts because it kind of got me through the work day and gave me the creative juice. It gave me the inspirational juice that I needed to get me through. But I didn't want things to just get me through. So one of the podcasts that I was listening to, I forget which one it was, but it definitely resonated with me when the person stated that whatever you're passionate about or joyful about, think back to childhood
Mm.
and whatever you got excited about as a kid, that that fire still burns within you, and that's something that you should explore and
Mm.
think about. And so I said, okay, well, as a kid, I really loved photography. I liked the idea of it. I've always been an artistic child, but I never explored it as an adult until I
Mhm.
went to art school, but more so on the technical side with interior design. And then now coming out of art school and realizing I think there's something more here, I decided to explore photography on more of the hobby level. But then
Mm.
it grew. I started out as just like playing around with a camera and experimenting with it and just learning how to actually operate it. And the more and more interested I got into just learning the camera, I
Mhm.
equally gained interest in how to brand myself, which I did not realize needed to coexist in order again to build a business. And
Mhm.
that wasn't initially what I wanted to do. I saw myself as like a business owner in some capacity, but on the design side, not necessarily the photography end. And so
Mhm.
it just escalated from there. I again, listening to podcasts grew this passion, and it really fed what I was really trying to go after because I was
Mhm.
constantly I was constantly playing and listening to people share their experiences as side hustler of some sort and trying to build their business from part time to full time and
Mhm.
getting to these points at their full time jobs of like unfulfillment and then realizing whatever they're doing on the side is, more passionate than what they're doing full time. And I was like, I got to explore what this is about. And photography was it for me. The firms that I worked for were super supportive. They knew that I was dabbling in photography on the side. They loved that I was passionate about it, but they were architects. And
Right.
I was more interested in how do I rebrand us as architects as opposed to actually doing construction drawings? And that was not the part that excited me about going to work. What excited me was when they gave me an opportunity to like photograph the team or do some kind of creative project with the camera and so it kind of trickled down from there.
I
um
love it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting though because I got to a point at my architecture, like at my at the design job that I was working for the architects, when I realized that I wasn't creatively fulfilled there. So I
Mm.
left the architect job to go to more of an interior design specific firm that focused on healthcare design. And
Mm.
though it was still design, it was still not creatively giving me the juice that I needed. And
Yeah.
again, I did more branding work. I feel like I was more passionate about doing that side of work for the firm as opposed to doing the design documentation. And
Mhm.
I had a conversation with my boss one day. I felt like I just couldn't sacrifice that anymore.
Mm.
And I said, I just had to be open and super candid with her. And we had a very open conversation about me not feeling fulfilled with the work that I was doing with her, and she felt the same kind of energy from me,
Mm.
and literally fired me a week later. And it was probably the best thing that has ever happened thus far because that was what pushed me into freelancing full time.
Mm.
So it was at the top of, I think, 2018. 2017 was when I parted ways. 2018, I'm sorry, 2019.
Mhm.
I've only been doing this for one full year, well, a year and a half now at this point. But yeah, it was 2019 at the very beginning of the year, and I hit the ground running to brand myself as a full time photographer. I knew that design still was very much important to me, and I did not
Mhm.
want to sacrifice that part anymore. So even though they're two very different business structures,
Mhm.
I still practice both and I
Mm.
don't feel like I'm compromising one for the other now that it's under my terms, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So let me
Yep.
ask you a question. I love on the podcast, I really do try to get a mix of people that have just started out to people who've been here in a business for 5 to 10 years. I think it's important because the people who are just starting out they remember what they needed to do in order to get started. And so for you, what did that look like? So you're like, okay, I don't have a job.
Yeah.
I need to make money. So what were
Yeah.
some of your first steps?
So some of my immediate first steps into freelance was okay, understanding that there's got to be a community of people out here doing the same thing as me.
Mm,
So I want to know who those people are. I want to know who the photographers are, who the videographers are, who the creatives are in this
mm,
area. I need to get to know you. You need to know me. I need to know what you do. You need to know what I do so that we can use each other. And
mm,
that has been my biggest, that was the very first thing that I made a priority outside of, or jumping into this full time, was really the community aspect, which I still hold so much value in now because it's so important. And I hate the idea that in some of the smaller towns, like Wilmington is not a very large city, it's a very small city. And we don't have the largest artist community here or
mm-hmm,
creative community, but it exists and it is here. And the folks who are a part of it know each other now, but
mm-hmm,
it takes the desire to want to bring everybody together in order to do, because we all have, you know, our own educational backgrounds. We have access and taps to certain people and connect to certain folks that we should be able to use and utilize each other for. And that's been my biggest thing, because the second that I connected with this person, they put me in a direction with this person who put me in direction with this one. And next thing I knew, I was building this network of really fantastic people to get me where I needed to go and to expose me to certain clients and experiences that have literally just fallen and just continue to fall in my lap at this point, to say the least. But yeah, that was one of the biggest things.
And then before you go to the next thing, for the people out there, what does that look like? Because I think, and I'm really, I try to be give people practical advice on the
Yeah.
podcast because I think sometimes people struggle with, they're like, I know I need to network with other creatives. Does that
Yeah.
mean I should go on the Facebook groups? Does it mean I should call
Ironically,
people and go to coffee? You know what I'm saying? So
yeah.
what did it look like for
Yeah.
you?
I mean, a lot of creative people are not outgoing, and they're very it's hard. It's hard to get step outside of you and your bubble, because we all have them, and try and build with somebody else that you don't even know. But for me, because I am relatively outgoing, I have to give a lot of credit to my network of people, to my design experience, because I built really solid relationships from my internships from design firms, even
Mm,
from when I was working for the architecture firms and other design firms as a full-time employee. Like
mm,
I was constantly in contact with clients, with reps who were connected to these people, who were connected to this industry, and just me being me and not and always being super optimistic and just friendly and wanting to know and gravitate to like different folks. I just always kept those people in my back pocket. So
mm,
the second that I left the industry, I made them all aware that I was now full time doing photography, specifically on a business to business level, so that I can possibly be of support to them in some capacity. I still hold a very close connection to the design industry, so photography and design go hand in so many different ways. But yeah, I would say it started from really just like building off of my existing network from the design world,
mm.
and like building off of that and tapping into more of the creative scene when I got more into it. And then not being afraid to travel. I immediately, this was one of my funny stories, but I didn't have any money when I like left. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have $10,000 saved up. I barely had $500 in my bank account after paying bills and things like that. But at the beginning of the year, I had always wanted to go to fashion weeks in New York, and I when I was working full time, I could never make it because I was working, and I didn't have the availability to take the time off to go and explore and do street style and do all the things
Mm.
that I saw all the cool photographers doing that I follow. So immediately after, I was not working full time anymore, I was like, I have to go to New York. friend lives in Harlem, so it's okay. I have a place to stay. I'm gonna go. I went with $200 in my bank account, and I just shot a bunch of street style. I was able to get into my first fashion show just
Mm,
by being there, being on the street. So there's so much to say that if you just take a risk and just take a jump in some kind of way, that
mm,
you'll if it's supposed to be, you will just fall right into the places and connect with the right people that you need to at the right times, and that's really what it's been.
mm. You're emailing, some of these connections, you're taking risk and going places like New York and putting yourself out there, taking photos. What were some of the other things you did just to like say like, hey, you guys know seriously, I'm taking photos and accepting money. Yeah.
So it obviously you got to have a website. People need to be able to find you. So Instagram is not the end all be all. You need to have some kind of platform that leads them or anyone, potential clients or just anyone you want to know who you are. You need to have some kind of home base. And so I was
Mm-hmm.
like, all right, well I know I have to have a website, but the work that I want to put on this website I don't want like the work that I have thus far. I don't want on there. So I had
Mm.
to strategically market myself to the types of projects that I wanted to attract. Luckily, they started to come in and flow,
Mm.
but I had to be very strategic with taking paid projects and then also creating some work that was not paid that
Mm-hmm.
I had to do on my own that reflected what I wanted to do. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
work shows up on my website currently. It's super
Yeah.
outdated, so just FYI, like everybody, I need to do some serious work to that
But
site
it's
because
still
it's
gorgeous.
so
It's still
super
gorgeous. The
outdated.
photos are
Thank
like
you.
beautiful.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. But I have got to put some serious time in. That's another conversation. But yeah, it was me needing to have consistent imagery and work whatever I was working on, I wanted to make sure that I was showing that consistently on my social feed, but then also having an opportunity to lead someone from my social platform to my website so that I can encourage booking and driving that traffic there because that's what's
Hmm.
most important. Yeah.
I love it, and even though I know you say you need to update the website, I was telling Shakira when I decide who's coming on the podcast, I become a mega stalker, and I always try to make sure like their brand is on point. Every once in a while, I might make an exception depending on like what kind of information I'm trying to get out of people, but when I saw your website, I was like, oh my goodness, her photos just kind of like draw you in. There's just definitely you have a very specific style. So I think I could pick it out of a lineup, right? Like, oh, Shakira must have took those photos, you know? And so my question to you is on your website, it has a section for like brands, interiors, and then you have people in lifestyle, and then you have also the New York Fashion Week from 2019. How did you determine? Because you can go, oh my God, it's so many directions with
Oh
photography.
yeah. Mhm. Yep.
Weddings, right? I mean, your interior design, you could
Right.
have did real estate photography.
Mhm.
I mean, so many different directions. How did
Yeah.
you determine what to focus on?
So, okay. When I first started out with photography, I dabbled in everything. I did the families, I did the maternities, I did the newborns, I did the kids, I did weddings, and none of them sat well with me.
Mm,
I wasn't excited about that work. And granted, that doesn't mean that I completely exclude those out of my work sometimes because sometimes I do actually well, it really just depends, and it's super limited. But I'll occasionally take on a maternity session if it feels right. I'll
mm-hmm.
occasionally do a family if I'm doing some kind of like seasonal promotion, which is again very once in a while. I don't like to do those, but the primary work that I wanted to focus on really was branding because of the experience that I had with the design firm that I was at. Just
Mm,
understanding. Okay, so as a designer working for architects, I realized that, especially for this firm, I realized that there was a gap, and I felt like they were really missing an opportunity to show the culture and the essence of the firm and who was working for them at the time. And
mm,
I felt like you're only reflecting old white men,
mm,
architects,
mm-hmm,
A,
mm-hmm.
issue. And then also trying to attract young talent. Well, B, no one's going to want to work for just old white men.
Mhm.
And you're not showing any kind of culture that exists within this firm. You know what I mean? Like, and not the culture doesn't have to just be represented by black people. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Even though we bring that and inevitably, but I didn't want that to be the narrative for the firm that I worked for. And so, I would throw out ideas of why don't we have someone come in and document what it feels like and what it looks like for us to work for this firm? That is the
Yeah.
same exact energy that I pitch to any brand that I work with. People want to understand what it is like to work for you, or how they can connect to you, period, before they buy anything from you.
Mm.
And that's what became more important to me, and that's why I went into specifically working with branding photography, because I
Mm.
really do feel passionate about developing the language and what it looks like for a business and an entrepreneur or a creative entrepreneur, whatever the case. But I love working with other businesses on a business to business level to do that.
Mm. So I'm gonna pivot for a second, and then I'm gonna circle back to what's been working in your business. But I think you brought up something that is really very relevant during this time. So during COVID, there was like this whole social justice movement, in particular, kind of like the Black Lives Matter movement, right? And I think it was a wake up call
Yeah.
for a lot of businesses, and not just like your traditional businesses, Walmart or Target and Anthropology and so forth, but also for those, large Instagram accounts that might be like home decor bloggers with 80,000 followers and so forth. They were also being told by their community, hey, you know what? Actually, your feed is not very diverse when it
Yep.
comes to diversity. And so, my question for you is, with photography art, do you have any kind of tips for people on how they can incorporate more photography within their brand that represents a whole wide range, rather, group of people, just not blacks,
Yeah.
Asians,
Yeah.
Hispanics, and so forth?
Well, I honestly don't know how you would do that through photography if it doesn't already exist within your business.
Mm,
So if it doesn't exist within your business, then there's a problem right there. Why?
mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's why doesn't it exist? That speaks to another level of things, and it's a bigger question for a business that doesn't have or reflect other people that are not white.
Yeah.
So I think that's really the question, to be honest, because I don't, outside of doing the whole stock imagery to show what something, and I'm putting air quotes for those who can't see me,
Mm-hmm.
which also seems a little illegitimate and not fraudulent, but why not have diversity? You know what I mean? Why do you have to have like a whitewash team, or what's the driving factor? I think it's really just about like what the company represents first, and identifying who they are as a team, as a culture, and then imagery should just inevitably reflect that, because that's
Mm-hmm.
what I want to see. Like I said before, I think people really want to connect and identify with someone before they decide to buy something from you or decide to work with you. They want to understand you to a deeper level first,
Mm.
or the company, if you will.
Yeah, and it's like so interesting because I know read some articles, and there's been several conversations with people trying to figure out how to do it, right? And it's just like, it's looking at your feed, it's looking at your website, and if it's not representing the diversity you think it should, it's making those changes. If you're a clothing line, it could be hiring a photographer to, you know what I'm saying, and making
Yeah,
sure that your set of models are diverse.
yeah. Well, absolutely. And that also is another thing too, because not all photographers understand that concept.
Mm,
They're not creatively directing the set. You know what I mean? It's a difference between having a photographer and then also having a photographer who does creative direction.
mm,
Unless the company has someone specifically doing that, it's a hit or miss. And
mm,
some people are missing it. They're not representing it because they're just there to take the photos, and that's not what I represent personally. That's not what I want a business to have the experience of, especially with working with me. Like, no, let's build together. Let's understand to a deeper level what your business is and what that represents, and then let's source from there
Mm-hmm.
to tell the full story. Yeah.
So circling back to you with that said, I wrote down here like storytelling, and
Yeah.
that goes with the creative direction. And so someone listening might be like, "Well, what do you mean?" Like, so as a photographer, don't you just come and I tell you like, "Okay, I want to take a picture on this couch and I have these, products and that's it." So can you talk a little bit about like your process? Like how do you work with brands to make sure that their story is told?
Yeah. So we first start off with after the person or after a brand or client has been onboarded officially. I think it's really important to have, like I said, an initial conversation and digging deeper and asking specific questions of who they are, how they came about, how long they've been in existence for, what they represent, who they attract, just understanding all of those things to a deeper level. And
Mm-hmm.
then it's about, okay, how do you want to reflect XYZ in your brand moving forward? And what I like to do, and this kind of stems from my design experience, but any creative person does this, is storyboard everything. How do you visually represent initially what you want to do and achieve? And so I do storyboarding out or mood boards, whatever you want to call it, but literally just developing almost like a mini brand packet, if you will, with just
Mm-hmm.
identifying like colors, textures, tones, imagery that represents what that client is going for. And we do a visioning packet. So I call it a visioning packet. That's what each branding client would receive prior to the kickoff date. And so it
Mm-hmm.
literally gives us a baseline of what to expect. We develop a prop list. If there are props that I will source or the client will source, we'll just outline whatever those items are specifically that will help narrate and help us curate whatever that set is for the imagery and the photography to go smoothly.
Mm. So are you sure you just been open for like a year and a half? I mean, so and I joke and say that because I know somebody's like, how did she learn how to do all that? I want to be a photographer and I don't even know how to. So how did you figure out like that's what you wanted your process to be?
I figured it out all by trial and error, and then also really paying attention to some of the folks who were doing it and doing it right. And I
Mm.
will
Yeah.
always shout this woman out because she is a gem to me. But if y'all do not know Tamara Darden, you need to get to
Mm.
know her. She is located and based in DC. She
Yeah,
is
my
also
neighborhood.
yes, she's a branding and product photographer, and she did a mastermind class last year. And I had been following her leading up to me going full time freelance. And I had just admired her work, her business style, how she was just always dishing out really awesome information and just willing to say very specific things and how to do certain things on her Instagram. And I'm just like, this is stuff that people should be paying for, but you're just willingly like sharing it. I need to pay attention and write some notes. So that's what
And
I was
take
doing.
action, right?
And take action
Which I
exactly.
love.
So really that's where it all stemmed from. I really just paid attention to the people on my social feed. I made it a very like a big priority to follow specific accounts that really spoke to me on a business end on how to sustain, because that's the most important piece to all of this is we can be creative and we can create and produce work for other people and for ourselves, but how do I make money from this? And then how do I continue to do so and build off of that? And I just got really intentional with how much money do I need to make a month as a person? Like, what are the things that I like to do, the lifestyle that I live now? What do I need in order to support that? Because I don't want it to
Mm-hmm.
stop. And I'm super grateful for what I have built thus far. But, and I know this isn't the end, but it's still just a matter, it's a good starting point to be at because I've identified really early on a business end what I need to make and then match that. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and I brand myself so that I'm getting exactly the amount of money that I know I need for project work in a month. And then
Mm-hmm.
I carry over in 6 months and then the year. And I think when I first realized that, oh my God, I'm actually making money from this was when I burned myself out. I took 10, 10 different projects in 1 month,
Ooh.
10 different projects. And it was the best worst thing ever. But I made my goal. But I also realized you cannot do that. You cannot take on 10 different projects and see them all over the place. There was no consistency or continuity with how I was seeing certain projects, because there was like a $200 or $300 project and versus a $1,200 project, and then
Mm-hmm.
there was, you know what I mean. So nothing was succinct. So I said, okay, immediately right after I took Tamara's mastermind, I said I have to develop a pricing structure that has to exist, and I have to stick to it, because this is going to give me a baseline.
Yeah.
Everybody that comes to me, and it worked. It literally worked. I Right after that, I was like, okay, I don't have to take 10 projects to make $5,000 in a month. I can easily do 2 or 3 and make that goal, if not more. And I
Mm-hmm.
started to do that. Now, granted, there were some moments last year I actually completed, just recently, I completed one of my design projects for a full renovation to a 5,000 square foot lash studio
Mm.
right around the corner from my house in my neighborhood, which was super convenient. um, a client found me from a previous client that I did a project for, and it was just like mixing in the design work with the photography work gave me an opportunity to almost upsell. So, for instance, if I was working for someone who was a design client, that's design is branding, right?
Mm-hmm.
For the interior.
Mm-hmm.
It's different than photography with rebranding or wanting to brand yourself. Yeah. So having the design experience that I have, and still that being like a very like prominent thing that exists within my business, it showed me that I could leverage the idea of upselling, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
because after a design project is completed, typically it always gets photographed for
Mm.
marketing material. And on top of marketing for the interior of a space, like if it's nice and pretty and people want to see the new imagery for their social feed and have that for their websites, they still also have a team, and they still need to have updated imagery on the team site or on the team end. I was able to not only just photograph a completed interior project, but I was now able to say, okay, as a business within your new space, you want to have new imagery to match that. And it allowed the client to say, okay, yeah, you're right. We need to have updated imagery within our new space. Let's do branding imagery. And so
Mm.
we'd go off in that direction. But yeah, it wasn't until I realized that I burned out at 10 projects where I didn't need to take on that many to like actually make my monthly goal. I could see one solid project at the rate that I needed to make in that month, and I could live off of that. You know what I mean? And give myself the time and grace to actually be able to creatively function through a project from start to finish, as opposed to feeling so spread with so many different directions.
Back in the day, I used to do graphic and web design until I was like, no more. And I found I was doing like these little projects and like logo design here, or somebody would try to lowball on the website. And then after a while, I was like, this is crazy. Why not just charge $3,000 to $5,000 for a website? And as a side hustle, doing 3 websites a year, I can make 15K in a year, right?
Yeah,
Instead of
yeah.
doing a $300 to $500 logo here, a
Mhm.
kind of half website for $1,000
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
It's so much work, and sometimes the
Mhm.
projects that are less money end up being more work than the projects that are more
They
money.
always are. They always are. It's ridiculous. Yeah. And then
Yeah.
sometimes not even paid on time. Like I saw a meme the other day, and I'm like, the $300 project will take you have to go through XYZ, or it takes like 5 days or something for something to clear, and then the project that's fee at $1,500 is like directly deposited, and I'm like, that's such a
Immediately,
word.
but that's how it always
Immediately. But that's
is.
because people take serious. If you're dishing out a couple $1,000s on something, that means they're serious about it. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
no
I
one has
agree.
time to play with big money. Like, no, I want to pay you and get the work done. Right.
For sure. Well,
Yeah.
I think it's so interesting. So, for your design projects, is it mostly businesses, or do you also do like personal homes, or do you stick with businesses?
For the most part, it's businesses. I just accepted and onboarded a new design project that is someone's residential home, and I don't typically do homes as much. If it is homes, it's like a very simple consultation level restyling, but it's nothing extensive. But this is a very extensive, pretty big. It's going to be a crazy like project, like just design and styling and things like that. Like I had to get my architect involved. It's really in depth and it's
Mm.
super special to me because it's a historic preservation project and I love historic
Ooh.
preservation. So
You're
I'm
like, I
like,
will take it.
yes, I will do this. But what's going to happen is, Nache, is that that project is going to sustain me for a couple of months
Mm-hmm.
where I don't need to feel like I'm obligated to take on anything else because no, this is something that is both creatively fulfilling and it's also feeding me. So
Right. Which is
I'm good.
important.
Right. And that's it. And then, I'll take on a couple of photography projects and sprinkle them in, but for the most part, that will get me through the remainder of this year financially and it'll really just be on a project managing kind of level as we go into 2021. So,
Okay, so before we get to the wrap up, I wanted to cover three things.
okay.
How you invested in yourself. You
Mhm.
mentioned team, so I just wanted to cover that really quickly. And then really quickly, COVID
Yeah.
and how you survived, like
Mhm.
what
Mhm.
that meant, right? So let's start quickly with investment because it sounds like you took the risk to go to New York, which helped kick things off. It sounds
Yep.
like you also invested in what's her name's Tamara, right? Tamara's
Yep.
course,
Yes.
which was,
Yep.
and I'm assuming that was probably if she's pretty good, it wasn't cheap, right?
No, it wasn't cheap, but it was super affordable for I think the level of education that she was really providing. I really do.
And it
Yeah.
sounds like it was worth though that's one of those things
Absolutely.
where it's regardless of how much it is, if you come
Mhm.
out better and making more money, it's worth
And
the
understood.
investment because you're getting that money back, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
So I just
Yeah.
wanted to like highlight that cuz and were there any other things that you invested in your first year that you can think of?
Yeah, I immediately bought a new camera. So there's always the equipment factor. I was working with a crop sensor like Canon 80D initially, which was still getting the job done, and I was accepting projects, some of my branding projects that are still on. Like most of my website, I use that camera for, which is a crop sensor, and now I work with a full frame. So it was important to me to level up in my imagery and what that looked like, in addition to how I wanted to structure business. Like both need to
Mm.
coexist. So it was really important for me to upgrade.
And so what I mean, because for the photo photography nerds out there, they're gonna
Yeah.
want me to ask, so what kind of camera did you end up getting?
So I use a Canon 60 Mark II. Yeah, it's a
Oh,
yeah,
fancy,
and
fancy.
it's fancy, but it's not even like fancy compared to what some of my cool photographer friends use. I'm like, I can make it work with this just fine. And what I love to shoot with is an 85 1.2 or a Sigma 35 1 point was it 1.3 or something like that. I love that's my favorite lens. I use it for almost the majority of my projects, or I'll use a 50. So I skate between those three, but mostly the 35 Sigma is like my favorite. I just really love the look of it.
Mm, okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, people, I asked. There you go. And you say team, right? So do you have people that, depending on the project, they're like freelance contractors that you work with? Or do you have people that are actually a VA, an assistant, and so forth that are full time people that are working with you now?
So not entirely just yet, but I knew it was something that like. It was another thing that I knew I needed to develop as I developed. And last year at this time around, actually maybe in the summertime of last year, I kind of just put it out there that I needed an intern because things were just so busy for me that I just felt like I needed someone that I could teach and mentor
Mm,
that can help me develop whatever it is that I'm creating. And
mm-hmm.
so interesting because I was working with, I consider her like a business partner, if you will, but she is definitely someone else who contracts brands and then uses me as a photographer to document. Like, so she's the liaison between a brand and the photographer.
Mm,
And I find her to have so much value in my business, and our relationship has grown so much just from that. But she had one of her younger cousins was interested in both photography and design, and she told me about her. She was going to art school, and she said she really wanted someone to mentor her, and she suggested her to contact me. She did. We met, and it was great. It was a great like introduction to that relationship,
mm,
and that a year ago. And then in the beginning of this year, as things took off right before COVID, I said, I want to reconnect with you. Let's start sitting down and really structure how this can really form into a full time internship with me
Mm,
or part time, just something so that I can get you versed in the design world and in photography.
mm.
And we started to do that. We started to meet regularly. I would have her assist me on shoots, and then COVID happened, and then I was like, oh, what
This is,
without you physically being here? And like everybody else, we all got into this mindset of, all right, well, if I can't physically go be somewhere, I guess I better learn something. So we're all in these virtual, seminars and just trying to be there for one another, even on like a mental health side and just taking
yeah.
tons of courses and things like that. So we all went through those motions. And then I said, okay, well, maybe I can teach her how to edit. You know what I
Mm,
mean? While we have this downtime, let me restructure a couple of things, and then I can teach her how to learn Lightroom. And we
mm,
did that virtually together. And we would have Zoom meetings where we would review what Lightroom looks like, how to use it, how I edit, what my editing style is, and just verse her in all of those things. Then when there were moments where we were able to go out and functionally, like I was literally working on a design project right into COVID,
mm.
and we were just ending the construction process, and then went down. So I'm like, it's just like impacting the project. And so when things started to free up a little bit, we had access to space and we were able to, maneuver that world a little bit easier. So I would just bring her along on those site meetings with me, answer any questions that she would, just being there as a resource and mentor for her to answer any questions that she has, because I want her to understand
Mm-hmm.
all of the things that I do and am involved in. And the more and more we're around each other, she starts to pick up certain things. So she's learning my habits and what I would
Yeah.
gravitate to and my style. And that's the best thing for me, because then she knows me. I don't have to
Mm-hmm.
physically with her in order for her to make a decision that impacts my business.
Right.
That's really golden for me.
Yeah, and I love that give back too. You forever changed her life. I mean, it's amazing. And then COVID,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, with photography, you kind of have to like be places to take pictures of people. So, how did that look for you? Were you, because of the year that you just had, were you able to like save up some money? So, even if you weren't able to do what you traditionally would do, which is go out and have these shoots, were you okay? But how were you able to survive COVID?
I I don't know the answer of how, but I just know that I have been super blessed,
Mm
because what I think a lot of people realized was in COVID, I didn't know how I was going to pay my rent the following. You know what I mean? Like we were
hmm.
knee deep in like some messy stuff,
Mm hmm. Mm
and I think we all just had some grace because we were all in it together. Landlords understood certain things for the most part. I mean, depending on where you lived, I think really dictated how people were reacting to the situation and how forgiving they were.
hmm.
And
Mm
let's,
hmm.
where we are in Wilmington, Delaware, in my apartment complex, they were super forgiving and understanding. They were very like willing to be patient, and like, as long as I was very open and transparent about, hey, like I'm a freelancer,
Yeah.
people ain't ready to throw out money right now. You know what I'm saying? For this very luxurious and privileged work that I do.
Mm
Like,
hmm.
it's a privilege to do this work
Mm
for
hmm.
people. It's not a necessity.
Mm
You
hmm.
know what I mean? But
Yeah.
I had to make myself a necessity for people. And I think what that did was light the fire under people. The second that things started to release, people were like, I want to develop this brand. If this thing happens again, how do I be of support to people? But then how do they connect with me, and how do they know who I am, and how do they see me? I need a photographer.
Mm.
That's what happened
Mm.
immediately. And then on top of that, everything with Black Lives Matter and the injustices
Ah,
that were
yeah.
happening, and the
Yeah.
fact that I'm a black-owned, woman-owned business,
Mhm.
people were absolutely reaching out to work
Mhm.
because they want to feel like they're connected and of support. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that happened, and it's really just been a bundle of abundance. And I'm very grateful that it happened, because now I've been able to see, okay, here's what I need to do in
Yeah.
order to like keep this going. And since the summertime, it's just been an influx of
Mm.
clients, and in the best
Yay.
way. Yeah, I'm very pleased and grateful. I know that it has not been the narrative for a lot of people.
Mm.
Still trying to figure it all out as well too, but I'm very grateful that I was able to come out of it with being able to make money. You know what I mean?
Right. No, I am so glad to hear
Yeah.
that because everybody didn't make it. I
Right.
talk to people who know artists who it just didn't work out. I have
Right.
stores near me in DC
Yep.
that no longer are open. And the thing is, it's like we're still going through COVID, right? So it's not
So
that
like
it's
this.
over. It's just figuring out how to navigate in this COVID world. So no, I am so happy for you. All right, so
Thank
couple wrap
thank
up
you.
questions. You gave
Mhm.
us tons of goodies, so thank you. How do you stay organized? Any tools, software, techniques?
Yeah, so I stay organized, and what helps me be consistent with my booking process is through Calendly. I love Calendly. I see
I
they
love
use Calendly as well. But even just like my sourcing and like outsourcing for different projects, I always encourage people to do a discovery call. So I keep that consistent with my social media, which is linked to Calendly. In terms of like project tasking and managing, I am still trying to get things consistent with that. But for the
mm-hmm.
most part, calendaring everything, and then
Yeah.
also task like being able to code certain projects through Asana. One of my like go-tos. There's one that I just came across as well. I forget the name of it. I have to find it, and hopefully I can send it to you so you can put it in the show notes.
Mm-hmm.
But another photographer used that and like swears by it. So I want to explore what that is. But
Mm.
I haven't found one solid platform on the project managing side just yet
Mm-hmm.
that I can really just glue myself to use consistently. So I've really just been dabbling, but Asana is one of my favorites, and then just Google calendaring everything at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then do you have a hobby?
Well, not anymore because photography used to be my hobby. But honestly, I have a dog, so I spend a lot of time with my dog. I love being with Ginger. My hobby is really just like being with my friends. I have a really, really supportive friend circle. I love being around them. I love being around other creative people. And just if I have moments to create when it's not about work, I try to do that as much as possible because my spirit needs it. And I've learned
Mm-hmm.
that it's not always about creating for money. It's
Mm-hmm.
because those projects aren't always the most fulfilling either. Even with
Yeah.
photography, I get burned out. Um, but yeah, just being able to free flow and create when I want and on my terms is nice. So I would say an occasional painting session is
Mm.
nice. I've been getting into watercolors, and so just
Ooh.
having fun with those, or even coming up with a custom or my own like personal photography series is what's more of a hobby for me. And I did that recently through a series that I call Give Me My Flowers, where I
Mm.
decided to, this kind of came from the Black Lives Matter, but speaking for the support of Black men, just recognizing that a lot of times they're shamed and often shamed for their masculine energy and shamed for the feminine energy that also exists within them. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's got to be a way that we can shed light on this. And it organically came from just experimenting with one of my other friends on a basketball court. And we created this beautiful set and curated it with these florals. And I said, this is it. Like, this is what
Mm.
it has to be. And it just escalated from there.
I feel like I didn't see that on the website. We gotta add that to the website.
Thing that I've done that needs to be on my website is there. I'm telling you. And I'm speaking to now I need to hire somebody to do my website because
I know,
I
right?
don't have the capacity. You know,
Which is great because that
sometimes you just
means,
can't do
right?
everything, and I'm so stretched. I'm just like, I literally just cannot focus on this to be able to do it. Somebody else has to have this responsibility, and I'm okay
Yeah.
with that. Like, I think there has to be points when you have to shift and give other people certain things to do
Yeah.
that you cannot do, and we need to be okay with that.
For
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Oh, this has been great. Can you just tell the listeners where they
Uh,
can find you?
Yep, you can find me on Instagram at Creative Studio. I spend a lot of time in my stories, so you'll always know what is happening with me because I post a lot there. And I try to post consistently to my regular feed there. If you want to send me an email, you can email me at info@shakirahunt.com. My website is www.shakirahunt.com. I am on Facebook, but I don't like to spend too much time there because, yeah,
It's Facebook.
um,
It's we all
but
have to have it because so many people
yeah,
are on it, but no one
right.
wants to use it.
And it's a good way to connect with my family who lives in Bermuda and just like are disconnected but connected at the same time, and that's Ginger. She says hi to everybody.
And I've been waiting a
Yeah.
while for you.
Yep, exactly.
Thank you. This has been amazing
Oh, it's
conversation.
been a pleasure.
Appreciate you coming on to the podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm grateful that we were able to do this.
Oh my goodness, what did I tell you guys? Good stuff. I love chatting with Shakira. Just a few takeaways for you guys. The importance about building a community, even in the age of COVID, you can still connect with people. There are several people that I've connected with via Instagram and Facebook. When you connect with folks, hop on a Zoom with them or hop on a FaceTime with them. I've done that even in the last few months with people that I've connected with on social media. So definitely figure out how you can build your community even during the age of COVID. Having a website, someplace where people can go, like nachesnow.com/shop, right? To buy all your goodies. Like you need to lead a place somewhere outside of a social media platform because Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, whatever could go away and then you're totally screwed. And I love that she invested in herself from taking a risk with Fashion Week to actually being a part of that mastermind. If you talk to any successful person, they will tell you stories about how they've invested in themselves along the way. Of course, you need to make sure it's something that makes sense for you, but please, please invest in yourself. And I just thought that she gave really some good advice about being intentional with the money you bring in. And every year I really tried to think about that for my business because in the beginning, I needed it to pay off bills and survive. So it was really important for me to bring in a decent amount for during my side hustle days. I mean, I'm still in my side hustle days, but in the beginning, I really needed to bring in a certain amount in order to like just make it. And so now my income goals have changed a little bit, but I still do have income goals and I constantly am figuring out what I need to do in order to try to meet those goals. So definitely think about that if you're full-time or a part-time business, what are you trying to do? And if it is make money, how are you going to make money? Because at some point you have to start charging people, and if you don't, people will just expect everything will be free, and that's not good either because then you will end up losing money, and so that's no fun. And then the last thing I'll just mention is our conversation about making sure that your brand represents diversity. And I thought she made some good points. Is the first step in doing that is just making sure that your team, and the people that you are networking with are diverse, right? So by doing that, naturally your feed, your stories, everything about what you do will naturally and organically become diverse. But I also think it's important too to be a little intentional about it. Like when you're doing, as I mentioned, product photos and things like that, to make sure that you're working with someone that can help you through that, to make sure that you have different color hands or people in your photos and that you really are representing a cross section of society. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Of course, I have another amazing guest next week. And show notes for this page, nachesnow.com/114. Please support the podcast, buy me a cup of coffee, or buy one of my digital planners, or just go over to Skillshare and take my course. Whatever makes sense for you, I appreciate any and all of it. All right, and don't forget, rate me 5 stars if you love this, and subscribe wherever you are listening. Okay, you have an amazing day, week, month, and hopefully I will be in your earbuds again soon. All right, take care. Bye.